the overturn of Roe v. Wade and all of the indications that the Supreme Court has been making are going to have sweeping impacts on personal portfolios, the economy, people's lives. But with my investor hat on, when people look at grand themes in the market and the investment community, by and large, people just weren't looking at the overturn of Roe v. Wade. And, if I had to conjecture a couple different reasons, one is there's a lot of stuff going on right now, but two is that the majority of it are cis hetero white men who are watching market themes, and it's just not on their radar that all of a sudden, the majority of the country is going to lose bodily autonomy.
Hi, my name is Frank Schaeffer, and this is a podcast that I do called In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. We do this first as a live stream on Facebook. After that, it goes to YouTube and 3 or 4 podcast sites where podcasts are available. I'm going to be talking to someone very interesting today. You do not have to scribble down notes on how to reach this person if you want to talk to her later, because when we post stuff, we post all the links to anything our guest would like to have known better or promoted, or how to get in touch and so forth. So today I'm talking with Janna. Okay, Janna, I asked you how to say Janna. You said Janna like Anna. Tell me the second name. Meyrowitz Turner.
Meyrowitz Turner.
Yeah. See, thank you. Janna Meyrowitz Turner. And we're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff, but here in what I'm reading now, it says exploring reproductive freedom and the future of American democracy. And Janna is an entrepreneur and speaker advisor, angel investor who has been building values-aligned coalitions for over 20 years across, now what is CPG? Just tell me.
Consumer packaged goods.
Okay,
products.
see, I just have to get pronunciations and lingo. Yeah. Fashion, tech, finance, entertainment, politics, advocacy, healthcare, wellness, food, and more. And back, in the day, maybe 20 years ago, if I'd been doing this, I would be pretending to know all this. I would be pretending not to read it and peer at the screen. I've not gotten as far as putting on my reading glasses yet so that I look at the thing. But I mean, I used to be cool. I just want to tell you that. And now I'm just old, but that's okay.
I think it's cooler to be your authentic self. So.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, within limits. I mean, some of us get too authentic. I think of some people who are too authentic, but thank you for being here today. Now, you and I met because you were part of something else that I was watching, and it had to do with reproductive rights, and it had to do with the subject we're both very interested in. And that wasn't that long ago. And then I saw you and I noted your name down, and I forget who introduced us or whether I just got to you directly, but anyway, I wanted you to be part of this. What was it that I saw you on the other day that you were doing?
Yeah, so that was a state of reproductive rights briefing that I had wrangled together in the end. I started doing that in the end of April, early May, and the timing was pretty uncanny because, and I'll rewind a little more as to how I came to be doing that, but I put together this state of reproductive rights briefing, invited everyone on May 2nd, early in the day. That the leaked memo came out later that night. And I had sent this email, urgent state of reproductive rights briefing. Yeah. And really the angle, the hook for that event was that it was specifically for the finance, investing, wealth management, asset management community, because the overturn of Roe v. Wade and all of the indications that the Supreme Court has been making are going to have sweeping impacts on personal portfolios, the economy, people's lives. But with my investor hat on, when people look at grand themes in the market and the investment community, by and large, people just weren't looking at the overturn of Roe v. Wade. And, if I had to conjecture a couple different reasons, one is there's a lot of stuff going on right now, but two is that the majority of it are cis hetero white men who are watching market themes, and it's just not on their radar that all of a sudden, the majority of the country is going to lose bodily autonomy. Yeah. And so the impetus for that was kind of the impetus for positioning it that way. And I was really fortunate to have Jennifer Driver from the State Innovation Exchange Mary Ziegler, a historian on the Constitution and abortion. She's written like 6 books on the topic. She has a new one coming out. I'm going to connect you guys for that. And Dahlia Lithwick, who covers the courts for Slate, and she has the Amicus podcast, and she's frequently on MSNBC. Yeah. And really, it was important to me, most above anything, to connect the dots. What does this mean? Like, I'm a systems thinker. I've always tried to figure out, how do we, change the way power and money flow? And so if we think about where the leverage points for change, going where the dollars are is important.
Yes.
So that was that was the impetus for that briefing. There were 2, we did 2 of them to accommodate busy schedules. We had over 200 people on the briefings across 2 days. I'd estimate, not everyone was from the asset management or wealth management venture capital community, but I would say we had about 10 billion assets under management between those 2 calls, which I'm proud of among other qualitative metrics and things that we impacted and increased awareness around. And yeah, I'm grateful for, I think it was Amy Cross that brought us together. And I really appreciated your segment on CNN with Amanpour. And when it comes to my background as a communications strategist and thinking again about how do we, I believe all problems can be solved through communication and repositioning, and that can be somewhat reductive, but sometimes it starts with the communication and positioning to ourselves in our head, and then out into the world. But that's what's always informed my my work and my endeavors as a, you asked me before what CPG stands for, consumer packaged goods.
Sure.
And I started my own public relations firm in 2006 when I was 23. I had worked at a couple other public relations firms here in New York City and in the consumer space. So products that people are buying, fashion, beauty, wellness. And the cultures at some of those agencies were not conducive to me doing my creative and impactful work. So that was one of the reasons why I went out on my own, but also the media and marketing landscape was changing so quickly in 2004, 2006, and has obviously continued to, and has not slowed down. We were looking really holistically across all the channels and touch points that brands had with their various audiences, paid, earned, owned, so not just media, but also other marketing channels, which obviously exploded with social media. It was also really clear to me that the more I learned about these businesses, that our power as women, besides how we have sex and make babies, was how we shopped and how we consume. CPG, consumer packaged goods, that's everything from your laundry detergents and your hand soaps and all the things where women, probably in that category, make higher than 90% of household purchasing decisions, but the number varies based on what you look at, but it's women make 80 to 90% of household purchasing decisions. And our purchasing power is well understood by people that try to sell us things, but it's not well understood by us. And so that was kind of a driving force for me in using the tools of communication and media for good.
Yeah, one of the people I've interviewed here and who actually is probably the person who began the connection that led to the connection that led to us talking today is my friend Jose Zelstra, who runs something called Gender Fair, which is an app people can download to see about the company they're about to buy something from or the airline they're about to book a ticket from in terms of their gender equity, fairness issues. And then she introduced me to another group of people called the WBC, the Women's Business Collaborative, run by Edie Fraser out of Washington. I think that there's a lot of cross pollination here. I would bet that of your 200 people who were on board the other day with the project that I saw you on, a number of those are probably working with Jose on something, or with Edie Fraser at WBC. There's a lot of cross-pollination here. So, I'm aware of other people, women in leadership positions who are making the case you're making. And then, of course, it goes a step further, looking for allyship with men who kind of get it and who are on the same side which is where someone like me comes in with my story. And because you saw that Christian Amanpour piece with me, you kind of know my history of coming towards this issue from the other side as a young man working with my evangelical father, very much on the other side of the issue. And then a kind of a lifelong journey toward it. And that's given me a good understanding of thinking on both sides of the issue, because I have lived in both camps. This one now for the last 35 years plus since I really left that background. But it has given me a sensitivity towards the fact that there are a lot of people on the other side of the issue where you are today, or where I am today, who really have not understood the implications beyond the abortion issue itself in terms of just gender equity and what this means for women across the board, but also men in this culture that's nibbling away at just the idea that the individual has privacy, that the individual has autonomy. So I want, before we get into what you do and how you got there and a little bit of your personal story and family history and all the other things I want to delve into, let me just ask you broad strokes philosophically, how you are thinking of the issue, not in terms of yourself, but in terms of the public relations you do, speaking to a well-meaning, conservative, evangelical woman out there who is the backbone of today's anti-abortion movement. I know that the mythology on the left is that it's a bunch of white old men doing it and how they don't have any right. You know that's not true. There are a lot of women on the other side of the issue. I wonder how you would present, from a public relations point of view and simply just a philosophical point of view, a kind of a pause where people on the other side of the issue would be stopping and thinking about it and listening to you. And I'm sure you've had discussions with people on the other side of the issue who are well-meaning. We know about the bad people and those who are not well-meaning, who are very canny and using these issues. Let's talk about the well-meaning cohort of conservative women in the US who are very much on the opposite side of the issue today, because it seems to me that without thinking about those people and trying to address their concerns, we're not going to get very far in terms of turning this around. How do you address this? And this is not a rhetorical question. I have no answer. I'm asking you, Janna, how you address it, because you're a communicator. How do you address this?
Yeah. First and foremost, I am not an expert on having cross-aisle conversations. That I want to be pretty clear on. I very much live and operate in a bubble of fairly progressive and privileged people in Brooklyn. I do a fair amount of it's always going to come back to care for me. It's going to come back to focusing on compassionate care for the self and care for others. And it's also going to come down to collective liberation, the idea of all of our destinies being inextricably linked. And that will always be my guiding star in these conversations. I don't know, how do I say this? Through my lens of personal brand strategy, or even as a marketer and communications person, there is no one size fits all language. There's no one size fits all strategy. There just isn't. Nothing will work for everyone. There's people in this movement who say, well, we can't just say women's rights, we have to say birthing people, because we need to be inclusive of people who are non-binary and trans and have there's other people with uteruses who are not women. Yes. And if we make the messaging so that those people can't even wrap their heads around it, then we're reducing our impact. We're not maximizing our impact. Right. So I'm always going to come from a place of we have to be able to hold two truths at once. And we have to, very few things are binary, especially this. When it comes to having that conversation with the woman who I would start by asking questions. What's important to you? Behind most of these things is fear. You know that. And so what are they actually afraid of? What's their deepest and darkest fear? I mean, literally around marketing roundtables, we think about that. What keeps them up at night? How do we sell them things based on their worries, right? We're just trying to do the same thing with concepts and ideas.
Yeah, I think that, one of the points I brought up with Christian Amanpour on CNN the other day that I try to make wherever I, when I do commentary on media or just in conversation, is that there's this misunderstanding of the fact that somehow the evangelical right and the religious right in America always was anti-abortion. And of course, as I pointed out, this was simply not the case. In the 1970s, when Roe was passed, Reverend Billy Graham, who was the biggest evangelist of all time in US modern history, was pro-choice, as was Dr. Criswell, who was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. I bring that up often with people from that background who have assumed somehow that part of evangelical theology from the year dot has always been this. And I point out that's simply not the case, so that at least whatever else they're thinking, they don't think this has always been part of the package. And the same goes for the idea of conservatism. Ronald Reagan legalized abortion in California as governor, and a Republican governor did so in New York, and they were both rather conservative. Reagan quite far to the right, even as governor. Rockefeller less so in New York, but still a conservative Republican. So, I think one of the misnomers is just this idea that somehow this package has always been set in stone. And, obviously the evangelicals leaders had other reasons, political and fundraising, power politics and so forth, for moving the needle on this. But I think it comes as a surprise to a lot of people on a more conservative side on this issue of a woman's right to choose, to understand that when Roe came down, evangelicals were not evenly divided. Most of them either were ambivalent or pro-choice. It was not an evangelical issue. That surprises a lot of folks, but that is borne out by the facts. And the other thing I think that, we can bring up is just the idea that, and that I often do in discussions with folks who take a different point of view, is I say, look, we're not talking about a perfect world here. We're talking about a world of ambivalence and paradox. This is not an issue of perfection, that somehow having an abortion is better or having a child is better. It's an individual decision. The question is, who's going to make that choice? Is it a male gynecologist? Is it a panel of judges? Is it a group of politicians? So let's at least agree now that someone is going to choose. Someone is going to make this choice. And that person or persons may make a mistake. They may choose wrong. They may choose right, because we're human. But they still have to make a choice. So the issue is, who makes the choice? And in my book, somehow people have avoided that reality by pretending that there's some higher authority that can make the choice, as if they have some special insight. And of course they don't. So, my view is very firmly that obviously logically, morally, spiritually, biologically, commonsensically, that it's obvious that the person closest to the issue is the individual woman. So it isn't that she's going to always make a perfect choice. It's that someone has to make that choice. So who should it be? Me, a 70-year-old white male, or 6 guys on a panel, or the individual woman? And so that's kind of, I think, the beginning of the discussion for me, that takes away the kind of hard iron cast parameters of politics, because it really is a choice. Who's going to make the choice? And it really has not always been this way. That right-wing group used to be pro-choice. So you put those two things on the table, and at least you have a discussion. Sorry to hold forth, but that's the deal.
Yeah, I think I've been working in and around and investing and advising in the cannabis industry since 2013. And the idea of the war on drugs being an agenda that was put forth, a narrative of misinformation. There are so many parallels to be had here, because it was also a way to criminalize being poor. It was a way to, there's so much to unpack there. That's a whole nother episode, but I see a lot, this has been called Jane Crow, and, abortion bans are the new war on drugs. But I think that it requires a certain amount of zooming out. And, I think all of the work that you and others in this space do, who are kind of using the framing of faith to then launch new conversations, it's consciousness raising. Everyone's just looking for a way to explain why things are the way they are. And so to the extent, I think that if we can help people zoom out, it brings them back to realizing that everything is connected. And that abortion was brought to the pulpits by people who had an anti-woman agenda. I mean, the idea that, I talk about this, abortion is a very convenient canary in the coal mine for the rest of our rights that the Supreme Court and the MAGA Republicans are coming for. Abortion is a convenient canary in the coal mine because there's a whole faction of people who can't even say the word abortion. And so it brings me back to, reading about the Holocaust growing up and the famous poem about, when they came for those people, I didn't raise my hand because I wasn't one of those people. And then they came for me and it was too late. And the problem with this anti-woman agenda is that the women are saying, hey, this isn't okay, this is happening to us. And that's why we need cis hetero men, especially, to understand what's at stake. Maybe inconceivable to them that the miscarriage and subsequent D&C procedure that their wife had was an abortion, but to the state it is. And if they go and bring that, and they bring their wife to the hospital and she gets accused of, or they get accused of aborting that fetus, that all of a sudden makes it really real. And it's those stories that people need to hear, because people need to see themselves in it. And that's why I would, you open by saying, how do we talk to that woman that pro-life woman who, I don't know how or why she wants to engage in this conversation. It has to, I have to know who she is and what's important to her. Sure. But ultimately, that's why I say I bring it back to care. Like, where does compassionate care fall in your spectrum of faith?
Yeah, let me reintroduce you a second. This is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, and today Janna is my guest, and you are someone in marketing, public relations, investment portfolios. Essentially, I guess you could say you're someone who tries to influence public policy, but brings a level of expertise of marketing to that. Is that fair?
I would say that is what I've been spending the last 6 months focusing on because of the urgency of this moment. Yeah. I would say historically, the majority of my work has been in the private sector. But I would say since 2016, I have been more activated to find leverage points for change rooted in kind of common sociocultural discourse. And how do we find, the idea of marketing and branding and meeting people where they are. Like, I'm taking kind of those tools from the private sector marketing and branding playbook and trying to use those strategies, for change.
Ernie just sent me a really good note that I want to pass on to you. His little message to me is dig deeper on engaging men. And of course, you're talking to a man right now, but who is, I guess, engaged in this issue, and that I feel very passionate about it. But, we talked about talking to women who perhaps are on the other side of the issue, and we've kind of touched on that a little bit and looked at some of the history of it. What's your experience in terms of engaging men? You got a little more into that when you were talking about a man bringing a wife to a hospital for a miscarriage, and suddenly you realize, hey, this is all about me because now I'm being accused of being an accomplice to an abortion in some state where it's now illegal or going to be soon. Let's just talk generally in terms of your perspective on engaging men in this discussion, but also in this in the discussion of this tone of misogyny, which essentially runs through so much of these debates around issues that impact women more than anyone else. And yet, men seem to have so much to say about it and want to still be in charge somehow. That comes a little bit from my biblical background, both in Judaism and Christianity, which portray men in a biblical context of being divinely appointed to be in charge of women. This craziness I was raised on, I moved away from it. But in general, our culture, whether it's the bro culture in Silicon Valley or something else, we are very much still mired, from my point of view, in a deeply misogynistic culture. And I just, don't like that one bit. Wish I could do more to change it. Let's address Ernie's question here. If you get the question, how can we dig deeper on engaging men in these issues?
Right.
Where do you start?
Right. There's no one answer. First, to be clear, I love men. I'm a cis hetero white Jewish woman. I'm married to a cis hetero white Jewish man. I love men, and we need men. We need men for so many reasons. I sit on the board of an organization called A Call to Men that has been doing this. Ted Bunch and Tony Porter have been doing this work for over 20 years in calling men into conversations around healthy manhood and violence preventing violence against women and girls and those at the margins of the margins. We're working on a project now centering Black trans women, and a lot of my kind of education around collective liberation and gender and racial justice I've learned so much from Ted and Tony, and advise people to engage with their work more. The idea of the man box, which is what Tony Porter talks about, is talking about the collective socialization of men. Just like racism is a system that we all live within, so is the man box. And in the man box, women are of lesser value and are property to be, they're there for men's pleasure and power. That's where zero-sum thinking lives, right? Someone has to lose in order for me to win. All of that stuff lives in the man box, and that men have to establish dominance, that if weakness, you'll be kicked out of the man box. And, they teach that the entire man box is held together with the duct tape, the masking tape of homophobia, right? Like if you don't participate in this, normative socialization of what a man needs to look like, then you've fallen short. The idea of toxic masculinity is in and of itself problematic, because masculinity itself is not toxic. And if we can only define masculinity as either toxic or in relation to women, then that's really problematic. So that's where I'll start with, just again, like, how do we kind of lay out that framework? Now, we really need to invite men into these conversations in ways, again, that speak to them personally. And this is where, my background, I launched my own public relations and strategy agency that I ran for 15 years, but now I focus more on personal brand alignment, which is personal brand strategy work that I do with high impact individuals. And I believe that anyone can talk about anything, even if they don't really know about it, because not purporting to be an expert on it, but as a human, like, we're all humans, right? So you can say, I'm not sure how I feel about this yet, but it's like the idea that this moment calls for leaders to like, cowardliness is not an option, right? Like, you're not allowed to not have an opinion on this, is the not soft headline. That being said, do we want, let's just think about like male business leaders, right? Do we need them to feel pushed in a corner where they have to comment on something, or do we invite them in? How much time do we have? Like, these are all things that need to be balanced. And I find, I'm so grateful to have a husband who engages with this work and wants to learn more about gender and racial justice and to be an accomplice and an ally in this work. But one of the things I say is, like, even the most woke of men who have done the work with a capital W still don't know what it's like to wear a outfit without functional pockets, like, which is like the everyday experience of a woman.
Yeah.
It's like these mundane, basic things that really impact our lives. That's just one example. But, so it's about building an empathic connection with the people that you're talking to, what's important to them. Mm-hmm. And, masculinity is complicated right now, and it's evolving in real time in front of us. I mean, I don't want to comment on any of the pop culture stuff of the days right now, because I want this conversation to have evergreen impact and lasting. But I think a lot of men are really confused about how to be showing up right now, and rightly so. We have been telling them for the last 2 years to shut up and listen, and me too, right? Like, just don't tell me what I experienced. Let me tell you what I experienced, right? And now they're like, wait, you want me to mansplain abortion to you? Like, well, no, I don't want you to mansplain abortion to me. I want you to explain it to your friends. I want you to pride yourself. I want you to learn about it and what the implications are. And I want you to pride yourself on being the one that teaches your friends about that and opens up their eyes to what's happening. And that, I think, is where, how do we play with, I don't want to say with the male ego, because that makes it sound like it's something that needs to be battled with. But I mean, so much of the misogyny and terror that plagues our society right now is rooted in men not having models of how to be showing up right now, how to deal with their emotions, how to process things that are happening, not being allowed to, right? Being confined into this box of what a man has to do. We'd rather see, I think it's Liz Plank that says, we'd rather see a boy with a gun in his hands than a doll, because a gun kills and a doll cries.
Yeah, I think that, what you're saying is, of course, true and to the point. I would even go further and say that part of the call of anybody who regards themselves as someone who is an ally, or at least willing to listen on these issues to women, is to first of all begin to look at the fact that, men, for instance, who are not availing themselves of paid parental leave, such as it might be in their company, part of their problem is not in relationship to women whatsoever. It's in relationship to themselves. I think that, as someone who's raised 3 children and has 5 grandchildren and has spent the last 13 years doing childcare for my youngest 3 grandchildren, Lucy, Jack, and Nora, the pleasure that I have had in these years of very intense childcare of grandchildren, so that my daughter-in-law and son can work, and changing my own schedule to do that, has shown me that the real tragedy here is not that men fail to be allies of women. Men, first of all, fail to be allies of other men. And one of the things I've been writing about in a recent book, but also just talking about it to people, is not that these are a sense of duty, and not a sense of duty, or that we somehow owe, and altruistically owe either women or families or children our time because they will benefit. They will benefit, whether you're doing the dishes or the housework or the cooking in the house, which I do, by the way. I like to cook, and I cook all our meals, but the real issue with cooking for me is the pleasure I get from cooking. The real issue I get from childcare is that if I had been raised in a way that said, oh, well, this is women's work, and to be a real man, what are you doing giving this 3-year-old a bath? Why are you doing a school pickup today with Nora, which I will in a couple of hours after this podcast, when, that's women's work? I would have missed out on the greatest pleasure that I've had. In fact, I would have missed out on the only thing that is giving me courage as I face mortality as somebody pushing into their 70s to go forward with joy in my heart. I would have missed everything that matters to me at this point. All the bullshit about career, the first good novel reviews of my novels I got, it's all crap in hindsight. I mean, it paid some bills, so what? But all my pleasure in life now is in the interpersonal relationships, which are often branded as feminine. And men are really stupid if they buy into this. So the first pitch I'm making is not mansplaining, abortion to anybody. I'm saying, hey, if you want to find joy in your life, let's climb down all of this stupid stereotypical idea of what men do, because the good stuff, you're eating the wrapping, or throwing away the candy. So I don't feel that this pitch is one of virtue or altruism. If it's altruism, it's certainly a selfish altruism, because it's what you see in the eyes of the people who love you most that the reward is. It's not in the paycheck or the title of your job. That's just my plea to other men. Here's the interesting point. I find a lot of reciprocity in that. I find a lot of older men my age who have learned that the hard way. I find that in a lot of younger men, like my son, John, who renegotiated his contract with the company in Boston so that he's working from home, except for 1 day a week now, rather than being a project manager there. Why? Because he can make his kids breakfast. Why? Because he can participate in the life that one generation ago would have been regarded as, hey, the real men don't do that. Why aren't you at work all the time? So that's my point of view. And I think that may be catching on with the younger generation. My experience is some younger men are getting this, and some older men get it too, but they get it in the sense of regret because they can't go back and get that time back again.
It's beautiful, Frank. It's beautiful. Your work and your voice are so important. Really. Thank you.
Well, I find the encouraging thing is I am not running into a brick wall on this.
Right.
I'm talking to other men who are saying, you know what, you got a point. I never sit there saying, oh, God damn it, if I'd only had 2 more hours in the office a day, everything would have been fine. It's the opposite. It's like, why the fuck didn't I get home and see my kids in the evening?
Yeah. I have so many things to say and nothing to say, because I just want to let that sit there, because that's it. I mean, it's consciousness raising, so many things I want to say. The evolutionary impulse of the universe is towards consciousness. That's an Eckhart Tolle thing. And you feel that you're not alone in this, right? And you continue to see the resonance of that all around you. And so going back to engaging cis hetero men, it really is about reconnecting them with themselves. The patriarchy hurts us all. Heather McGee wrote a really beautiful book called The Sum of Us about what racism costs us all. And it goes back to that our destinies are inextricably linked, and that, that hurt people. And one of the things that's really hard for men, my husband's 42, and, the idea that they don't all have Frank Schaeffer as a dad or a grandfather to be able to have even just like a vision of what healthy masculinity looks like. And it's back to also, how do we engage them? It's also like, we don't want to tell men that they fucked everything up. That doesn't work. Not that they need to realize it themselves. No, but they need to kind of to the extent that we can't wait for everyone to have their own personal reckoning with this, because we don't have time, and the United States is not sustainable, nor is anything in the world, as we've seen from all the global reports on climate. And it's all linked, because people who are aware of these things, who have a raised consciousness and who understand the interconnectedness of things, also take care of the planet and make more conscious decisions in those ways. And so it's all linked, but I don't have an answer for how we call men writ large into this work. I believe that for men in the finance and investing community, who by and large are like, those are great ideas, but I'm not going to fund that. I'm going to fund that, which is going to give me great returns. How do we have them see what Heather McGee, what does she call them? The solidarity dividends that come from understanding, and it's zooming out, right? It's things that may not seem profitable in the short term, but have enormous returns that you can't even imagine right now. right? But it's hard to help people see past what's here. That's why I appreciate and admire your work so much, because you were in this space and you saw what the driving force was there. And so,
yeah, I appreciate that. But, it seems one of the things that, we all need to talk about, and that has nothing to do with gender or race for that matter, is there's a few things we share in common as Americans, and that is levels of depression are higher than ever. Children harming themselves and suicides are higher than ever across the whole spectrum of society: upper class, middle class, lower class, Black, white, transgender, non-binary, doesn't matter. Young people are not particularly happy. I'm not saying all young people are unhappy, but I think there's a number of indicators that for anybody with the least vestige of humility today, no matter who they are, at least we can all agree, look, this is not an ideal situation. So what is contributing toward this level of loneliness and unhappiness? And I think a lot of it boils down to the area of human relationships, which of course the parent-child or the relationship between spouses or lovers or partners, this is the core of it. So it seems that, there would be people who are willing to listen in ways today that perhaps when things were going better, they might not have been. And I think American folks who are running corporations, the kind of world you live in, some of them seem willing to listen to the fact that, lo and behold, after COVID, a lot of their workforce wants to continue working from home when they have the opportunity to. They want to strengthen the human relationships in their lives and be able to take a deeper breath at the beginning of each day rather than a commute. I'm very cautiously optimistic on this front. I think that we may be moving in a direction where the general level of unhappiness and depression is an indication to even people within corporate America that if they want a happy workforce that's productive, they're going to have to help them with things like paid parental leave, gender equity, and a real attempt to be inclusive, to have a better environment in which to just be a human being. Forget work, just live. And I think a lot of folks are more focused on that now. I don't know if you're running into that.
I would say in some ways, yes. And then in some ways that stuff's happening in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, CEOs, the Davos Convention, right? They decided to move to stakeholder primacy over shareholder primacy. But that kind of changing of values happens over decades, not months or years. And at the end of the day, if we still tie someone's success and achievement to their performance in metric dollars, that's what's going to drive them. It's American capitalism. It's a uniquely American capitalism too, because there are other forms of capitalism elsewhere. Like, I'm a big fan of the donut economy, Kate Raworth's framework they use in Amsterdam and lots of other places. A lot of it is, they say, oh, well, we did this. We offered this benefit. Do they care if people are taking the benefit? Are they incentivizing people to take the benefit? Are they knowingly or unknowingly discouraging people from using that benefit, whatever that benefit might be? I think that one of the problems also with mental health, just with our healthcare even being linked to our employer, is that, I think of every time and I'm a big fan of therapy, every time I think about mental health in our country, or I have to find a new therapist or interface with the system at all, I think just how challenging this is. And I have means and resources and patience, and I speak English, and everything is so complicated to deal with.
Yes.
And so then adding in, it's like, okay, it's great that this company is going to fund, that they've said that they'll cover travel for abortion and all these other things, but is that executive really going to raise their hand and say, I'm going to go to this state right now and get an abortion, and I need all this time off? Are they actually creating a space where someone would do that? Right. And so it's one thing to say, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to commit to creating the environments where that goodness, whatever that might be, the care, the support, the service, the permission to rest, whatever that might be, is actually happens. And I think that's, I mean, there's a lot of do say deltas in the business world. People say that they're going to do one thing and you know, do other things. And I'll bring it all back to the fact that consumers, citizens, need to hold people accountable to these things, because that's where so much of our power lies. And we leave a lot of our power on the table with what we spend our time, what we allow to get our attention, and just underestimating our own personal power in what we say, what we buy, what we do, all of those things.
Jen, let me change subjects a little bit here. Let's spend a few minutes talking about what you do. I mean, specifically, how did you get into this? I know you told a little bit of this story. I've heard it in the other forum that we were in, but I'd like you to repeat some of that here. I'm interested in your path from portfolio investment to this life, and then what you do aside from the ideology involved and what you're trying to propagate. What is it you specifically do? You know, if somebody asked me that, I'd say, well, I take care of my grandchildren, and I also am still a writer. I'm married, have been for 52 years, and I work on that. That's what I do. I guess on the career side, I would describe myself as a writer. What do you do? Which is another way of saying, who are you in a wider sense? Go into that a little bit. You've mentioned your husband. You mentioned the fact that he supports what you do. I'd like to know a little more about that relationship. What do you do?
Well, so I would surmise that I'm a communicator and a connector.
Right.
I have always been a strategist in terms of like kind of problem solving, connecting dots on things, seeing connections between things. I was raised by academic parents. They both have PhDs, one in family sociology, the other in media theory and criticism, analysis of news type of work. So dinner table conversations at my house were very much about the kind of why we feel the way we feel about things, like how the media informs our perception and how we feel about the world, about ourselves. So I approached business always from a kind of academic perspective, just because of my upbringing. And so for the first 15 years of my life, I was an entrepreneur. I was a for-hire publicist agency. Like we did everything from media relations and press outreach, which is what a lot of people think about in publicity and PR, but also like I ended up like coaching CEOs and like creating partnerships that turned into mergers and acquisitions, and you know, copywriting and wordsmithing different company documents, internal, external. And so one of my big shifts in 2016 was that I chopped PR off the end of Style House, because I realized that I was undervaluing all of this work that we were doing. Because I was like, well, that's not PR. That's just like something I'm really good at, and I'll just do it. It's not a big deal. I enjoy it. And so this idea of like focusing on how to work with people that value what make you valuable, and like assigning a value to something that's hard to sometimes put dollars on, really informs how I have evolved and show up now, which is that I have a portfolio of about 20 startups that I advise, either because I have invested a little cash and money into them, sometimes with other values aligned investors, we put money in together to support a company. Sometimes I am advising a company in exchange for equity and points and shares in the company. And for me, that was, you know, I helped build all these companies. I mean, throughout the years, we worked with small family-run businesses that we helped grow to be acquired by private equity, publicly traded companies. I worked on everything from Estee Lauder to the WNBA, I think is like a good way to kind of, when it comes to like the breadth of consumer brands. I wanted to be a shareholder in the companies that I was helping to build. I had, you know, for me, like I had built very deep, authentic relationships across, you know, too many industries to count as just a businesswoman. And there was a certain amount of like, I didn't want my Rolodex to be for hire anymore. I wanted to change the nature how I worked. And so that led to building this portfolio where I'm advising and I'm a shareholder in the companies and I have skin in the game. And then this personal brand strategy work that I do, which is, it's called personal brand alignment, but it's rooted in kind of like the tools. It's like strategic communications and business development for the self. So it's rooted in a lot of the leadership work the work I did with leaders when I was there for hire, consultant, strategist, brand person. And it was always through this lens of the business. I was always hired by the business, but I really loved working with the business leaders and really figuring out how they could uniquely show up, uniquely steer their ship, uniquely build what they want to build and do it in sustainable ways. And I would do this thing that I called mindful business development, which was like, the idea that there's success looks different to everyone, and success of a business obviously looks like successful returns and dollars, but there's multiple ways to get to that. And what's your unique, how are you uniquely positioned to get to that because of who you are? And that mindful business development work is now pretty much how I tend to my portfolio companies, the startups that I support. And then I get hired I make money, what do you do? How do I get paid? I work one-on-one with personal brand alignment clients. They either hire me directly, sometimes I'm hired by their employers. I've also facilitated smaller group workshops, and I have started delivering keynotes as well based on these concepts. So I delivered a keynote in January to Athletes Unlimited, a new startup sports league that is really player-centric, very democratic, lowercase d democratic in how they set up the incentives for the players, for the brands, for the partners. It's just, to me, like really a vision of a regenerative system, which is how I want to be. Those are the kind of businesses I want to be part of building right now. And so I got to talk about this concept of personal brand alignment, and that it pays to be you. You are the way you are on purpose. You are your greatest asset, to a group of 250 female athletes. So that was really thrilling.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
When was that again?
That was in January.
And where was the venue for that? Were you in person?
Right here with Zoom, right here.
With Zoom, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you done any in-person stuff recently, or are we still Zooming everything?
I did an in-person conference in New York City last week. It was kind of intimate, probably 100-person, 150-person conference around angel investing and supporting startup founders.
Okay.
And then I did a keynote last November in upstate New York that was also intimate, but live, and really nice to be in community with people. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it interesting that, we make this distinction between, were you there live? Did you actually go? I never would have thought I'd live to see when that was a big deal. I was actually there, anyway.
Right.
Hey, so now on the other front, in terms of using some of this expertise, you've been spending the last 6 months kind of intensely in crisis mode, if I can put it that way, very, very prophetically organizing your stuff just before the Supreme Court obliged you or the clerk or whoever was leaking a document to help promote the urgency of this issue. So tell me about that aspect of your work. How much time is it taking, and what all are you doing? I've touched a little part of it, but I'd like to know the scope of your thinking on that and who all you're working with and how that's panning out.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, just the ebb and flow of life and other things. For the first time in 15 years, I don't have a full-time staff. Back to care, and it all comes back to care. I had been an entrepreneur most of my life, and I had always hired bright young things and taught them everything I knew, and then sent them off into the world to do cool shit. And once I became a mom, it was like too much caregiving. I couldn't be the person I wanted to be, do the work I wanted to do, intellectually stimulating, impacts, all of that, and be the boss, leader, mentor that had been so important to me. So I had to kind of figure out I needed to lead differently. I needed to mentor differently. And so what's interesting is that we were a team of two. I had a second in command for the last 2 years, and she now started her own agency, and it's great because I get to send her a lot a lot of business and other things, but my personal brand alignment work doesn't necessitate me having a full-time staff. And I feel very in my power right now in terms of like, I help other people get paid to be them. Like, I'm like, it pays to be you. And I'm like, the fact that I have the time abundance right now to be able to work on this activism feels like the ultimate privilege because I'm doing work that I love, that I'm getting paid for, and I have the space and freedom mentally to spend a couple hours a week, whether it's sitting here connecting dots on my whiteboard between, what are the ways to get this person to pay attention to that, or to pick up the phone and just kind of throw pie in the sky, crazy ideas at people to see if they think it would make a difference. And so I would say I was going to start writing a book this year. That was kind of my next project, because this personal brand alignment work, the demand has been so high. And I know that there are ways for me to increase the impact and the accessibility of the concepts, which like the concepts themselves, like can really help people live better. And so I wanted to make the work not available, not just one-on-one, but like one to many. And I wasn't that interested right now in like doing a course or an online thing. I really was like, I want to write a book, and I will write a book one day, but I shelved that project to next year because all I wanted to think about all the time was abortion access and reproductive rights and how to get people. So I guess what I say is like, I feel so privileged right now to not just have but to be able to be like, this was my plan, or this is my job, but like, I really want to be thinking about all of this, and to be able to like actually do that. And so back to my concept about like, what are you uniquely positioned to do? The more I had these conversations with people who care about this deeply and want to learn more, and it's always fear that keeps people quiet. It's not faith. It's fear of offending people of faith, which goes back to what you were saying, where you were like, this was never about faith. But I sign my own paychecks. That's freedom, and that other people don't have, right? This idea that I was actually the only one who could host those briefings that I hosted that first week in May, because even my friends at venture capital firms, who are all women, who are investing in women's health companies, they still have limited partner. They have LPs in their funds. They have just other people in their business. Yeah,
and people they don't want to offend or worries them. Talk a little bit here, just as we wrap up. You had mentioned you're, becoming a mother, and I'm just wondering now how all of that is going in relationship, not to these issues, but just the work-life balance that I write books about.
Yeah, totally. Well, my activism is an antidote to my anxiety. Like it's very much a part of my self-care practice. And as far as dividing stuff in the home, my husband is our CFO, our chief food officer. That's what we say. Sounds like you are also, which is such an important and just important and ongoing role. We have one child. He's 8. He's in 2nd grade. We have one child by design, right? The hegemonic forces are like, oh, everyone has 2 kids. And, I would say where we live in Brooklyn, a lot of people only have 1 kid, but there's also people that have 5 kids. But for us, we've always really thought about like, how can we keep the system safe, sane, sustainable, all of those things. In 2016, like I mentioned, that's when I started to kind of think about my business and how I wanted to monetize my business differently. And that was also spurred by what I call my ambition collision, when I just was like, oh my God, like I can't do all the things. Like I can't be the boss, mentor, agency owner that I want to be, do the actual work I want to do, and be the person that I want to be. Like, it was just not going to happen. And that's where I take so much of my learnings in that time, where like I can only be accountable to myself. I use a lot of that in my work with personal brand alignment. In my keynote, I tell the story about when I was trying to get my son to go down for a nap. And I was like, God, what would I give if someone was just like, Janna, you really need to take a nap right now. Like, no excuses, just go into bed and take a nap.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, wait, that's me. I'm the only one that could do that, or that would do that for me, because I am my own boss. And also, like, of all my friends, I'm my own boss. I can take a nap if I want to. Oh my God, right? And it's so going back to, like, it's not American capitalism, right? American capitalism makes us feel bad or weak or whatever if we can't just do it all. And it harms everyone.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Relationships first. Hey, you're going to direct us towards someone you mentioned. Tell me again about her. We're going to want to interview her. Maybe you could make that connection with my wonderful producer, Ernie. Who was that again? And I know Ernie's going to write it all down.
I'll connect you with anyone who is helpful.
Mary Ziegler.
Yeah, Mary Ziegler was one of
Ernie just sent me a message, Mary Ziegler. You know, it's such a good thing. Ernie's brain works really, really well. And my brain works too. But I'm hoping that I can keep Ernie around, you know, so that I can fake much more intelligence than I actually have. But, you know, I don't know why I have a trouble lying. Should have just gone, oh yeah, Mary Ziegler, I remember. No, Ernie remembered, but there it is. So let's connect with Mary, and I'll give you someone to connect with. I don't know if you've seen Aaron Bagwell's movie, Year One. Does that strike a chord with you? Year One.
It doesn't sound familiar to me, but that doesn't mean that I haven't.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's for free. It's been seen by many, many thousands of people. It's a wonderful film about her first year after giving birth. She suffered from pretty severe postpartum depression. But Erin made this incredible film. She's someone you ought to know about.
Yeah, I do a lot of work in the motherhood space, so I'd love to.
Erin made a wonderful film on female leadership. And then her second film was this movie, Year One. And she's somebody you ought to know about. Erin is wonderful. And I've interviewed her here a couple of times. And just talking to you and knowing who Erin is and her movie, and you're talking about your son and all the rest of it, I know that it is my duty to connect you. Yeah, so Ernie will give you all that information. So let's get Mary Ziegler on here, and then maybe you can come back and give us an update on what you're doing sometime in the not too distant future, if that would be okay with you. I found this lovely conversation, and you're wonderful. An informed person. I like hearing how you describe things. So thank you so much.
Likewise, Frank. I really appreciate and admire your work. And we need more voices like yours. So,
well, this is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And my recent book is Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy. And it's in bookstores everywhere or nowhere, depending, but always on Amazon anyway. So thank you very much for being with us. And anyone who wants to get in touch with you, I presume you will give Ernie the link that you want people to go to?
Yeah, Janna M. Turner, Janna M. Turner.com is my home, and you can contact me through there. And I'm on all social channels as at Janna M. Turner.
Good. Well, we'll put all that down, and please, I urge people who have been listening to this who want to get in touch to please do so. So thank you so much for your time. This has really been a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Stay safe and healthy. We'll talk soon.
You too. Thank you so much.